Hey, everybody. Welcome to the King Show podcast. I've got with me here a good friend and a coaching client and a super experienced land investor. And I'm just going to kind of dive right into things and introduce Bryan Lark. Bryan, you've bought and sold over 300 properties. You've built a $1 million note portfolio. You sold over 5 million in land, right? And yet kind of like in the on the podcast onboarding form, you'd mentioned you kind of described yourself as like a completely average guy. It's not really an average land business you're running. Why would you why would you say you describe yourself as an average guy?
Well, I think we've all been around people that, we admired for some great gifting or some type of, great intellect. And I don't feel like I really have much of that. And so, anything that's good about me or my business is just it's the sheer grace of God. It's like in spite of me and not because
Yeah.
of me. So, I do feel like I'm the poster child for just, the average guy who was just willing to learn and to dig in and stick with it.
Yeah, I know. I think there's something to be said about that that's kind of my approach too, is to learn it all, not a know it all, right? There's certainly things but it's good to recognize when you're kind of in foreign territory and what you don't know too, right? So yeah, I think that's the approach. And we just sharing with everybody, Bryan actually flew out here and spent a day like on site with me. So I know Bryan pretty well, and I can kind of speak to that where you're even as we would kind of get into very strategic and tactical things, you kind of kept coming back to like simplicity, right? Like, hey, this is something I want to be able to do on my own. How do we keep it, I'll be consistent, but how do we simplify this, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I tell people I'm not smart enough to be complex. So there's a lot of people that they have the bandwidth in their noggins to be really complex with their what they're doing in their business, and it's amazing to me that they have all these different tentacles going out in every direction, and they're able to manage that and figure it out very quickly. And so I found out real quick that if I try to do that, I just get lost and I end up just spinning my wheels and getting nowhere. Matter of fact, just probably going backwards.
Well, and that's where I think kind of sticking to what, kind of leaning into your superpowers, right? So sticking with what works best for you. So for some people, that's operating at that speed, right? And juggling a lot more balls in the air, right? That works for them. But I think if that's their personality, if it's not yours, then you're going to crash eventually. But yeah, I think kind of sticking with something that's authentic long term will make it enjoyable and just closer to to who you are, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some people, talking about superpowers, some people, it's their intellect. Others, they have great intuition. Some people just have a really big bank account. Some people are just like really good with technology. They're fast learners, you name it. There's always different, superpowers. I think the way that we're all created, we're all different, right? Nobody's the same exactly. And so we all have different competitive advantages. And so in sports or in business, whatever it is that you're doing where you want to be successful, you really have to figure out what that competitive advantage is, your superpower, what you're really good at, because you can't be good at everything. And so, for me, being in ministry, I was in ministry for 26 years. And so one of the superpowers I think I have is just the ability to communicate with people, to get to know people, to be personable, as opposed to being just really rigid. So that's one of those things. Also just the thing that I think I've picked up even in ministry over the years. I read a book called Simple Church, and it was just the concept of the book was just, hey, you don't need all this complex strategy for your church to be successful. You just need one or two things to focus on. And so that was ingrained in my mind kind of early on, even before I got into the land business.
Yeah.
And then, so when I started the land business, I read Gary Keller's book, The One Thing,
Yeah.
and that was a game changer for me. And I really started to understand a little bit more even about the power of like simple focus, just simplicity. And also, so that I would say that's probably been one of my superpowers as well, just communication and simplicity, focus. But also I would say, persistence, stick to itiveness. My wife says I'm stubborn. And so, that's probably a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. But you know, I think the ones that are able to identify what they're good at, find their niche,
Yeah.
and stick with it in spite of ups and downs and just be consistent with it. I think that's going to be a big help for a lot of people.
Kind of taken self inventory a little bit, right? Of what you are good at, right? Well, you mentioned this, and I don't want to just glaze over it because it's 26 years of your life, right? So that's a big chunk of your life. Let's kind of rewind that. So you spent 26 years in ministry. What point did land flipping or land investing kind of show up on the radar?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started ministry, I jumped right into ministry right out of high school. And so I did that for quite a while in different roles in different churches and different ministries. And so part of that journey led us, my wife and I, we moved out to Western Colorado. We started a church in 2011. And so we loved Colorado. We loved being there. We were there for 10 years. And
Where did you
what
guys move from?
so
Did you
we
move from to
Yeah,
Colorado?
we moved from Mississippi out to Colorado. And so when we planted our church there, we were really starting to get to know people, getting to know the culture. It was a different culture than what we were used to. But one of the things that we learned about the culture there in Western Colorado is that, for not for everybody, but for a lot of people, land and land ownership is a part of their identity. That you have a lot of the families that have just owned pieces of land, large pieces of land generationally. And it was just kind of a culture there, hunting and outdoors and wide open spaces and owning your own piece of dirt was a big deal. And so we had learned that, we had seen that. And then in 2015, about 4 years after we had been there, I really started getting the itch to have my own property because I got into big game hunting, love to hunt. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad's book about that time, and I knew it was time to get off the fence and start doing something. But
The
we really did. That's
purple
right.
Bible. You got
That's right.
the other Bible, right? And you got the real estate Bible, and then you
That's right.
got the
Yeah. So started getting the itch, and so we started looking around. Of course, this was right after. I say right after it was after the Great Recession when the real estate crash happened, and in that part of the country, and especially that part of our state of Colorado, real estate values had not recovered, even in 2015. And so we started looking, and land was, I wish I had realized it at the time, but it was so cheap. And so we
yeah.
looked and looked and really just, kept looking, couldn't really find what we wanted. And finally, 3 years later in 2018, my wife and I, we kind of reluctantly decided to move forward. We bought a mountain property. It was 35 acres. Again, that was in 2018. We bought
Was
it.
this on market?
It was on market.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was on market. It was listed at, I think, 85 or 86,000, something like that. It was for 35 acres of prime hunting ground. I'm just talking about a beautiful place, great views, nice aspen trees, nice little meadows and things like that, spring fed water on it. It was just a perfect little place. And so we bought it. I think we bought it, ended up getting under contract for 82,000. And so we did a little work on it, fixed it up. And, because of the reading from the Rich Dad Poor Dad, I had a place to hunt, but also it was
Yeah.
primarily an investment for us. And so after about a year, I had asked some folks, hey, what's this property worth? Now what could I sell it for? And I was told, you could sell this thing for 135 to 140. And I was like, are you kidding me? And so we listed it with an agent and we sold it for $140,000. So that was
Uh,
my
That's a quick turnaround for kind of an
yeah.
accidental flip, though. What was it listed substantially under its value when you bought it, or what improvements did you guys make on the hunting land to kind of jump it from 80 to, what do you say, 130 or?
Yeah, 140. Yeah. So I think it was a few things at play. Number one, people in the market itself really had not waken up to the fact that land was worth more than it was in 2010 or 2012 or whatever. And so the market wasn't quite awake yet. Maybe that's the best way to put it. And so when that property was listed, it was the only property that we could find anything like it, especially in that area. And so they had no real comps to base their market price on, their list price. And so we were just able to buy it. And when we were ready to put it on the market, it was kind of the same story. There were still no other comps like it. And so we basically were able to name our own price for it. We had, as far as improvements, I put up a couple of hunting stands, installed a driveway. I installed like a build pad, cleared out a place for somebody to build a home. We were going to put a cabin on it ourselves, but we had some issues that kind of came up with that, so we decided not to do that. But no major improvements, structures, anything.
And a small thing you did, but I'm sure helped with the marketing that you shared with me. You put up game cameras, right? So you left game cameras up taking pictures this whole time.
Yeah, that's the secret sauce. At least it has been for me. So when we purchased that property, it was in June of 2018. As soon as we bought it, I went out and got 2 game cameras, maybe 3, and I just put them up. I put one above the spring-fed, little miniature pond. Is a spring-fed pond. And Travis, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this, but by the 1st of September, just in 3 months, I had over 2,000 images that had been captured of elk and bear and deer coming to that water. And, I couldn't even keep up with it, how many there were. And I had, when we actually listed the property, it took me some time, like which pictures are we going to use to market this place? And because there were so many. And so that was something I learned, just because I like to hunt, I just wanted to see what was going to be
Yeah.
coming in. And it ended up being one of
It
the,
becomes a real marketing asset, doesn't it?
right, right.
Instead of trying to sell somebody the copy or the listing copy or text, right? Like there's nothing like a picture of a trophy elk, right? That kind of
Right.
is clickbait for hunters, right? So
Totally.
that you pull off that flip, and then where's your head at this time? Because you're still a pastor, and I wouldn't say you have like a growing land business yet, but you dabbled. You did a pretty profitable and successful flip. And where's your head at right now with what's next?
So, by the time we sold it, it was 2019. And, the whole concept of making an investment and doing well on it was really a big deal for us because, when you're in ministry, very few people get rich being in ministry. And it's not ever really the purpose of being in ministry anyway. It's just like you don't do it for the money. And so having some supplemental income on the side was a big deal for us financially to help support us and help us accomplish some dreams. So, in my head, I was thinking, well, that worked out well. Let's try to do this again. And as soon as we finished selling it, another property came on the market in that same general area. It was another 35-acre property, mountain property. It was literally 2 doors down from where we bought our first property, 2 properties away. And so, I didn't really need to do much due diligence. And for whatever reason, when they listed this second property, they didn't list it for 140. They listed it for 86. It was almost like they'd ignored the fact that there had been a sale. And so we just made an offer at full price and we ended up getting it under contract for 86,000. That was in 2019. And so it's rinse and repeat, by this time. So
Yeah.
we bought it. I hired VM West. That's a vegetation management company. Cody Neff is the owner of that company. Great guy, great company. And they came in with what they call HydroAx or Tiger Cat mulcher. And then they just mulched some strategic areas on the property to get, a lot of the overgrowth down, some of the
Yeah.
aspen trees down. We made some meadows because it was a little bit more timber on this one than the first one. So we got the meadows put in. We put in 2, really large hunting stands. I say really large, but more than just a tree stand. And so we put those on the property strategically. I put in an 1,100-gallon, water hole, like a Rubbermaid water hole that I was able to go in and just haul water into, just through a fire hose and a water tank in the back of my truck. And then we put a little small cabin on it. And so, we didn't spend a ton of money. It sounds like a lot of money, but we didn't spend a ton of money on it, maybe like $25,000 altogether to improve it. And so,
Now you had some profits to work with, right? So you're not dipping into your own accounts, right? So you probably felt better knowing kind of that proof of a sold price, not just listing price. Having sold one, you probably had a little more confidence spending that money, and you had some money to work with.
right, that's right. Absolutely. So we were just trying to be careful with with our budget and what we spent and all that kind of stuff. And so we just took the profit from, like you said, from the first deal and we sank it into this second property, fixed it up really nice and made it a really nice hunting place. Did the same thing, got game pictures and same story because it's in the same area, really good, healthy wildlife population in that area. And a year later, I put it on the market with the same agent. We listed it and we sold it for 165. So bought it 86, probably put 20 to 25,000 into it and then sold it for 165. And so by this time again, I'm growing even more confidence and more interested. And all this is just I just did this like on the weekends, on a
Yeah.
Friday or Saturday. Obviously I'm at church on Sundays, but sometimes in the weekday afternoon or evenings I would go out and work on things. But
Yeah, but make no mistake, when you're a pastor, it's not just Sundays.
right.
Right? That's a 7 day a week commitment. You're always doing something in preparation for Sunday or something throughout the week. So yeah, I imagine it's kind of tough to sneak in like full time, but that's a good takeaway too, because there's a lot of people just through how you find land, right? It's usually how you're introduced. It doesn't mean that's where you're going to be 5 years into it, but how you're the business model or how you're introduced to it is usually how you start, right? Whether that's flipping really cheap small parcels. And in your situation, it was like one a year, right? But you're making about 50,000 or something a deal, right? Doing one deal a year kind of and using the land to hunt on. So it's really is more of like just a not even like a side hustle because it's one parcel a year, right? It's just one investment property at a time. But I'll highlight that because as we get farther in the podcast, you guys have noticed this theme with Bryan. I think it's the living right, Bryan, but you got a number of these stories like this, right? Where, so that one, the first one you bought for in the 80s and then sold for 140. And there you created a comp that obviously the next seller could have used or agent could have leaned on, right, to list theirs. But here you find the second one and the 80s, right? And are able to double that. You've got a number of stories we'll probably talk about later. I know you got that mining claim story, and then we got the condo at the auction, right? So
Right.
guys, I think it's Bryan's living right. Some of these once in a lifetime type deals, you got several of those to share. But okay, so we're two deals in now, right? We're
Mhm.
two deals in. We're still full-time pastor. What's next?
Yeah, so we sold that in 2020 for 165, and then so it was time to find another property. So the same agent that I was using, his name's Reese Lovell, just outstanding guy, a great agent, specific agent who was there in the area. We found another property on the other side of the highway, not in the same exact area, but same county, another hunting property, and notice it was slightly larger, like 42 acres. It wasn't 35, it was just a little bit over 40. And we were able to get that one under contract. We bought it for 65,000. And so when I bought that one, I didn't do nearly as many improvements. Really all I did on this 42 acre property was like go in again, put some game cameras out. I put a little water hole on it where I could come in and just haul water, and
Yeah,
so we got that listed. My agent got it listed, and we sold that a year later to one of the neighbors. Bought it for 65, and then sold it for 130. And so that was number three. And so by all this time, I'm still, when we sold that, it was 2021, and I'm still pastoring. And then around that same time frame, my wife and I, we just kind of felt like our season there, at the church had come to a close. We felt like God had done what He wanted to through us, and we wanted to get back closer to family in the South. And so our parents were getting older, kids were getting very close to starting high school. They were in that kind of early junior high stage. And so
yeah,
we didn't want to pull them out of high school to make the transition. So we went ahead and made that transition. We first took a year to just travel on the road. We got an RV and a fifth wheel, and we traveled with our kids for a little while.
that's
And
awesome. Yeah, kind of decompress after a more than a decade, right? Of
yeah, as you said, it's not just a 1 day a week job. Ministry and pastoring is incredibly difficult from time to time. And so, taking some time
and,
away was
and all consuming. I mean,
absolutely. It was very helpful for us. And so, when we were Rachel and I were buying those properties, I wanted to continue to learn and sharpen the saw and learn how to continue to do this. I didn't really know what our future was going to be like and where God was taking us in our lives and our careers and that kind of thing. So I just kept reading books, and I'd read the Dirt Rich book by Mark Podolsky. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I read that and I thought, hey, there's something to this. And, maybe I could just kind of turn this into, an actual side
And
career.
that kind of introduced you as doing this as a business model, not just one property at a time, right?
That's
That
right.
probably opened your eyes to, all right, this is a business, or there's actually people out there doing this as a full time as a business model.
Right. Yeah. And it was completely foreign to me. I just kind of thought, you just buy a property and you sell it. But, what we call the land geek model was a repeatable business that I could understand. And so, I went into that in 2021. Like you said, that's when I started it as an official business, turned it into Zeteo Land. Just started learning the ropes and had some early wins in the business that gave me proof of concept that I really needed to have. And so I was able to start that as we were starting our RV journey. And so that kind of helped us continue to have some income on the road. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little bit. And
Well, and that solves kind of that problem though of needing, obviously you just gave up your paycheck, right?
right.
Regardless of what you're doing, you gave up that paycheck and now you need to build like some recurring income, right? So that model probably is probably really good timing for you.
Absolutely. The time that I started, when I did officially, jump into the deep end, so to speak, I happened to find a county that had a tax deed sale. And this was right off of the heels of COVID. And so what had happened, this specific county, they normally had an online tax deed sale every year, but there were at least 2 years that they didn't because of all the COVID stuff.
Yeah.
And so the county had gotten backed up with a massive surplus of land that didn't get sold. They weren't collecting taxes on it. And so when they finally did open up the tax deed auction, this was like, I guess it was probably like the third year. That was when I started and I had somehow heard about it. And I just jumped in and I said, well, let's just go buy some of these. I don't know what I'm doing, but we're going to, I think this will work. And so we spent, I don't know how much it was, but we bought, from the proceeds of those other three that we'd already sold, we put some of that money into buying some of these tax deed properties, and we were off to the races. It just worked. So
Yeah.
we're very
Yeah.
fortunate.
No, that's how actually our first properties Becca and I bought were at an online auction. So yeah, there and there's times where you can kind of hit gold, right? Depending what, how much they have listed and how many people are, in attendance or it's on their radar, right? So yeah, auctions can be hit or miss, but when you hit, you can you can really hit. Yeah, and what I learned later is for us personally before, because that was we found online auctions before I understood direct mail or how to kind of generate your own leads, so you're kind of at the mercy of the auction schedule and whatever they have available. But what we learned is some of when you start looking up these auction properties, it kind of like pointed us to these areas that we could then later, market to. At the time, it was direct mail only for us, but the kind of the auction listings. So even when I stopped participating in online auctions, I would snoop and I would go look, where they were, and you'd find these pockets where there were several properties, and then you realize, hey, this is like a good pocket, an area to market to. So now you're full time, right? Doing this full time. You've got a business model. You've got a proven framework, a proven business model. You've got that first year learning curve of getting software and marketing and all those things kind of set up. What, when did you start kind of team building or hire your first person and kind of go from just being you?
Yeah. So I guess, part of the answer to that is just, the learning that I went through and I was so fortunate to be able to have a coach. And so I kind of went through that again, that community, the Langate community, and Eric Peterson was a coach to me. And so he kind of walked me through about the steps of hiring and building a team.
Perfect. Yeah.
And so that was a huge thing for me, to be coached and to have somebody in my life that was someone who had been there and done that already.
Actively doing it, and it's been right where you are. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so, I believe the first team member that I ever hired was an acquisitions manager, is what we called her. And we hired her, or I hired her through a VA service, a done for you VA service.
Yeah.
And that I learned the kind of the hard way that the VA services, they can meet a need. They can certainly meet a need, and I'm sure they're great folks, but there's a great amount of turnover in
Yeah.
those. And they're never, they were, at least for me, they were never what I needed, what I really needed. But I learned, through hiring, that person and some other folks in that, VA service, I learned how to put the parameters on for a team member, and of course I'd hired people before in ministry as a pastor and things like that. But this is a little bit different, trying to figure out the parameters of how to teach them, you know, where are their boundaries? How do I prepare them to be successful in their role? And so that was a learning curve, but it kind of helped me to get where we are today with our team today.
When it kind of I feel like anyway, it kind of forces you to document processes that maybe you just go, hey, this is how Brian does it, or this is how Travis does it, but it's not on paper, right? Your first hire will expose what's not documented because as soon as they start asking you, what's the process, right? So yeah, I think that in a way, it's kind of like a forcing mechanism to force you to kind of move from, doing it all yourself to like documenting it as a business because you can't really delegate, right? If you don't have a defined, repeatable process you can hand off.
Right.
Um,
Well, and just the simple fact of the turnover issue, constantly having a new
yeah,
team member every 4 to 6 months, or even
yeah,
sometimes 3 to 6 months, you know, I, you know, I'm not a fast learner, but I learn fast enough that I have to be able to have something, like you said, a system, a document, or a process to hand them.
yeah.
This is how we do this. And that, forced me to put all that in writing, some training videos, those kind of things. So once I got that down, it was like, all right, well, if somebody does leave, it's going to be terrible. And I don't like that to happen, but at least I've got things in place that I can
Yeah.
give.
Well, you learn you're building either like, and I might have borrowed this from Michael Gerber, I think is where I heard it, author of the E-Myth. I think he talks about you either build like a people dependent business or like a process dependent business. And you're exposed when a good person leaves, a good employee leaves, is that's when you recognize you had a people dependent business. So you might not know it till it happens. You kind of know it, but you really feel it when it happens. Right. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of kind of documenting those processes so that when there is turnover, because there's going to be, you have less of it, like you said. And now I know you kind of shifted because I've, as we've worked together, you've kind of involved me in looking at some of the candidates, some of the hiring and stuff. What's your team look like now? Because I think you've moved to like US based primarily now, right?
Yes. And just again, going back to the coaching thing, I feel like, not only working with those, in that community, but along the way, I've went through some different coaches and just trying to learn from as many people as I can possibly learn from. And now that you're my coach and learning from you, I've kind of, had my thinking expanded a little bit. And so I think maybe it's for more comfort or ease of mind or just easier to deal with. I don't know what it is, but I felt like it was a better decision for me, at least, to go US based primarily for key roles. People that I really have to be able to communicate with in my time zone, in my language, in my understanding, in my culture. It just worked better for me, and it has worked better. And I've seen a lot more consistency and less turnover and
Yeah.
higher quality work in US, remote workers. And so, currently I don't have a big team. I have an executive assistant who, she's great. She just kind of helps me with special projects, making sure that, customer items are taken care of, some of the finances and the loans and, defaults and terminations and those kinds of things. She's great with helping me, with pretty much anything that I need. She's willing to help out. I also have a U.S. based acquisitions manager who is also great. She's a go getter. She's not afraid to pick up the phone. She's yeah, really good communication and people skills. So she's been great. And I would be missed to. I'd probably be in trouble if I didn't mention my bookkeeper. So I have a bookkeeper who is really good at what she does. She keeps a lot of the financial information straight and organized, and that's my wife, Rachel. So she
Your best hire, right?
she is definitely the best hire. So she's great. And if she ever stopped doing it, I don't know what I'd do. I'd have to find somebody, but nobody could really ever compare to her because she and I both are kind of built the same way. We just like things done the right way. We don't want to halfway do something. We want it done the right way. And not to say that everything's perfect that either one of us do, but that's just been a big deal. Our CPA, we've got a CPA that's US based instead of somebody, hiring somebody in Bangladesh to keep up with our, our taxes and things for us. But the only one that we really have, I guess I guess I still have two, international VAs. I have one that's marketing. And so, when it comes to my business and providing marketing materials and that kind of stuff and just posting ads, I really don't have to spend, a lot of money on a US based VA because that's not a greatly high skill level position.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to hire that out. And so she's been with me for a couple of years now, has done a fairly good job. And then I have a web developer that just helps me with my website and making sure that things are working properly on my website. She's again another international VA, but and then the two newest team members that I have, in addition to those, are my two boys, and so
Yeah.
they have been helping me part time. So I have one that he's really analytical. He's just smart. He's great with math, and he's good at logic and thinking through things. And so he's been helping me with things like building lists. That
The
we
data side and the
yeah,
marketing lists.
that's right. So he's been great at that. And then my younger son has been helping me with things like sending out neighbor letters. So whenever we acquire a property, he gets the addresses and puts the mail out, the letters, and send all of that stuff out in the mail so that we let those neighbors know, hey, we've got a property that's right beside yours. If you'd be interested in purchasing it at a discount, please contact us. And that's actually, it's done well for us. So
Well, it's really becoming like a true family business now, right? Where you've got the four of you involved,
right.
making efforts, at least at one level or another, right? Throwing hours at the business and that's got to be exciting.
It is. I'm super grateful for it. My oldest son, he's going to be a senior this year, and he's still trying to figure out what he wants to do with his next steps. If he's going to college, or if he's just going to step right into the land business, or do something different. So, selfishly, I kind of hope that my kids just
Yeah.
decide to work with me. But selflessly, I know that there's some other things that they may need to be exposed to as well. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Let them unfold. See, right? See where it goes. Well, I want to back up though on the hiring and the team because I'd say sometimes when you're starting, right, you're limited maybe by your budget, right? And you don't have enough recurring revenue or enough consistent profit coming in to make those hires or hire that US team, right? So you do see that. I do find and see people that years in the business will kind of transition away. But at first, kind of that arbitrage, right, of outsourcing and using Philippines based or like you said, Bangladesh or wherever, Egypt, some people do. It kind of you're afforded, right? You can afford to do that early on. But then now that you've got consistent, right? Consistent months, consistent revenue coming in, you're able to basically cover all the operations and all that stuff. And that allows you to do that. And that's why I think some of those bigger, healthier deals like you did, right, on the front end definitely give you the privilege to do that. Because some people fall into that trap of essentially like employing four offshored VAs and doing a lot of transactions, right? But at the end of the day, when you kind of do the math on the profit for the end of the year, you go, geez, it would have made more sense for you to work some overtime at your W-2 job than create jobs for others and stay so active and so busy. So I think that even the mental exercise of going through and saying, what does it look like if I were to hire onshore US based people? It makes you realize, hey, I need more revenue, right? And to afford these people. So it pushes you to a business model where you're doing bigger deals, right? Or you're at least you have like a benchmark, you have like a goal. You have to hit this in order to pay for the employees. It's not just you as a solo land investor and paying for marketing and buying properties. You've got to afford that team. So you got to build that in. So I think as you kind of doing the math on that, that's where you go, all right, something's got to change. I've either got to do X amount of big deals per year in addition to the smaller ones or something to justify that. So that if it really forces you though to go through that process, if you want to hire US based, which is a good thing because cheap labor can kind of be a trap, right? Where you don't end up innovating or graduating up if you've kind of solved that problem. So no, that's awesome. Let's move into kind of yeah. So when you started, did you have any kind of financial goals in mind, monthly, yearly? Was it recurring passive revenue kind of you were looking for, or was it just a number? When you got started out that you said, boy, I'd be tickled pink if we could do this per year and I could do it full time.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we were right in the middle of the transition. I'll never forget the day. My wife and I, we would walk around our neighborhood there in Colorado, and we were, contemplating this transition. And I'm not one of these people that money is the biggest motivator. Obviously, it has to be one of the factors. But I just remember, being in ministry for so long, your income is capped. You get paid what you get paid. And, you can work twice as many hours and you're still going to get paid the same amount. It just,
Yeah.
that's just the way it works. And so I remember in the transition, we had gone on a walk, and during that walk, we were discussing, potentially doing this as a career and transitioning into this. And I told her, I said, hey, look, this is not going to be my main motivating factor. But if we do this and if I start this business, I want to make as much money as I possibly can, not because I want to line my pockets, but because I feel like it gives me leverage to be able to be helpful for others and, to still contribute to ministry and people or other things and provide for our families' needs in maybe ways that hadn't been able to. And so, my main goal was just to try to, you know, provide for my family. And I realized that, I could do that and be available for my wife and my kids. And so, I think everybody knows this already, but this career that we're in, this land business, it's demanding at times and it's tough and it's discouraging and it's frustrating sometimes. But, the trade-off is that you get some more freedom back in your life. Early on, the thing that was pitched to me was, and I think to pitch to a lot of, people that are getting into this land business is, create passive income and you'll only have to work 30 minutes a week. That I'm not maybe exaggerating a little bit. And so that was appealing to me, like, oh my goodness, you mean I can do this and get this thing set for life and really, and in my mind, I was thinking that that's how it worked. But I found out real quick that that's not necessarily the way it works. And maybe it does for some people. It didn't for me.
Yeah.
But I found that, the goal that I had was to, again, just to take care of my family, to be able to provide for them, to be able to go to the sports events or the music, concerts or whatever it was that, that they're going to be involved in and be available and then be available for, for my role in ministry in the days ahead. And so, I'm not necessarily full-time or even part-time. I'm not vocationally hired right now as anybody in ministry, but I'm able to be a part and I'm able to serve in the areas where I feel like I'm most gifted, as opposed to the areas where I just have to serve because there's a hole there.
Yeah.
So that's,
Well, and I think when I started, that was for me too, was the ultimate goal is really like time. It was truly time rich. Like I was not money rich. So even my financial goals were, I would say like small or not like they weren't aspiring big motivational goals because it was like, hey, we just need to cover, obviously when you move to things like a loaded salary of an employee where you've got, health insurance, maybe company vehicles, all these other things, right? You take a big haircut. So for me, it was kind of like, hey, I need 10,000 a month, gross or whatever for us to live off of, right? And that would allow me to live at the same level we're living at, right? Without changing my lifestyle to go full time. So I just picked that number. Plus, I don't know, it just seemed like a round number and like a solid number. It seemed impressive yet attainable, for at the time for like I don't call it passive income because yeah, that's how it's framed to me too, but it's recurring. I call it recurring income because once you chase down some enough delinquent borrowers, you realize there's nothing passive about it. But I call it recurring revenue anyway, or recurring terms revenue, right? But my whole thing too is like you, time rich. Like I want to be present at all the kids' stuff. I want to be home, and mainly I want to have the control. I want to choose my schedule. So for me, like you, it was kind of more like freedom and autonomy and flexibility than it was so much like the number. But obviously, you gotta everybody's got to eat, right? So hitting that number becomes important. And then I'm with you though on the transactions because that's something I like. I'll share. I personally struggle with because I'm a growth person and a scale person, right? So as the business scaled, that's how you quantify things, right? That's the KPIs is like transactions, profit per transaction. You know what I mean? Like everything is numbers. We're in a transactional business. So when you're not money driven, but that's the language you're speaking all day, that's something I struggle with too, is where you kind of get desensitized to it where, you're constantly you're in this very financial and transactional type of business, but you go, that's doesn't really speak to me. I feel like you have to have some kind of higher purpose, right? Or some other goals where you go, okay, maybe like you go, hey, I tied 10% or whatever. So I know as the company's income revenue grows and I continue to do that, or maybe when I get to the position, I could tie 20% or something, right? I think tying things to that so helps, but I've honestly kind of found that to be a challenge, myself of you want to grow the business because you want it to grow, but at the same time you go, that's not really my goal anyway. So there kind of gets a point, and maybe that's just the season we're in right now, where you kind of there's some opportunity cost of continuing to grow beyond a certain team size or revenue point. So yeah, I can honestly, I can really appreciate how you've structured it, how you've kind of methodically built it. And then where were you at kind of when you found me and kind of reached out? And I know I was helping one of your buddies out, and you reached out to me and we got started coaching, because I wouldn't say you were necessarily like some people find me and they're struggling or they need to pivot or there's something. I'd say you had a successful model, but was it like maybe more like just opportunities that you knew were out there you weren't seeing, or what led you to work with me?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to keep reading and keep learning about this land business. And I had, gone through a meeting with probably three other coaches, Eric Peterson, and then Jaron Barnes, and then Mike Apke was learning from those guys, and all super great, helpful. But I picked up the book that you wrote, the Land Investor's Playbook, and it was, I don't know, it was like a switch got flipped in my head. Like, okay, there's more out there. There's
Yeah.
other opportunities that
Because
I,
I think you've done two of the seven plays. You're very familiar with the micro flip, but also I have the trophy hunting play, right? Which is waterfront properties or hunting trophy properties. So that's funny that you kind of, that one probably resonated because you're like, hey, yeah, that was my first. I've already done one of those.
absolutely. I just, I think I was at a place where, I knew, and I still know that, you know, the most successful people in any kind of realm of life, spiritual, financial, family, whatever, are those that are willing to take the time and invest in themselves. And, it's not just a money thing, because you can throw money at anything, it doesn't quite fix it, but you've got to also invest the time in it. And, the time in hiring a coach, learning from the coach, trying to implement what you're learning from your coach. And that was really just what I needed. And obviously that's been a great help for me. And, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I don't have a coach, I would say, find a coach that's going to push you, because Travis is not a pushy individual, but Travis, you basically helped me think about, how to do this business, but how to do it better, how to do it more efficiently, how to do it on a larger scale, and not necessarily more complex, but just larger in that, we're capitalizing on bigger opportunities as opposed to, small things and just kind of like on a hamster wheel. So
You're getting
that's
through your first minor land division, right? Your first,
right. Right.
like your
So
first splitting
mhm,
one parcel, splitting a 40 into four tens, right?
that's right. Yeah. Just working on that. Yeah, just
And
finished
we're
close.
we're kind of in the infancy, the early stages, but you got a deal here we're reviewing. We'll probably talk more about later today. That a big one, right? A big on market one. 1.2 million that can be subdivided, 640 acre that can be subdivided into 460 acres. And then you'll be able to kind of do what you did with your other hunting properties, right? Just at a larger scale. So that's something I'll share with everybody. We're working through, and we've probably got 4 different paths. We're just kind of working through throwing it on the spreadsheet and saying, all right, here's the optimistic, numbers, and then here's the realistic, and then here's the super conservative numbers, and kind of trying to find a path that makes sense. So yeah, that's what I want to do. I didn't want to blow up the business you had because it is successful and you're doing great. I just wanted to add to it or complement it with maybe some additional strategy, some bigger thing. And you've kind of taken obviously that challenge when I said, hey, let's start looking at right bigger. When we grow revenue, let's just do twice as many transactions of what you're doing. Let's get some assignment income. Let's get some subdivide income, right, to add to this. But I was kind of speaking more in the 100 to 300 range, and then you go, okay, here's this one, Travis. It's 1.2 million. How do we pull this subdivide off, right? So I would say like that's a big thing right there.
It is, yeah. And, I have for years, I've had it as one of my dreams, my goals to own a large acreage hunting ranch in Colorado. That's just something I've always wanted. I've had some other properties that were smaller, 35, 40 acre properties that I mentioned earlier, but I wanted something that was larger. And, I knew that there was some potential in some deals like that. And, obviously we'll see where this one lands. I don't know how it's all going to unfold, but I think that, I think the biggest thing, Travis, for me is that, working with you and just, you know, being exposed to this business, it's easy to think small. And so I think the biggest thing for me is to be able to start thinking bigger, dream big. And I think whenever we see a potential deal and we have an extra two or three zeros, we just kind of, our mind just shuts off. It's like Robert Kiyosaki talks about it in Rich Dad Poor Dad. Like we don't ask ourselves the good questions. We just say, can I do this? And if we say no, then our mind shuts off and then we're just done and we move on to what's easier, as opposed to saying, well, how can I do this? How is this possible? And there are all kinds of people that have done these types of deals that didn't have the money, they didn't have the resources, but they had the right, mindset.
Well, and that's like tying it back to hunting and properties, right? Like there's legitimate mental ruts, right? Just like you're heading up a dirt road, right? On the way up the hill to hunt, and you could kind of get trapped or stuck in some ruts, and it's like, it's tough to get out of them, right? Once you're in the rut, and you're driving up the dirt road and you're kind of caught in those ruts, it's tough to get out of them. It's the same thing mentally where you've kind of burned these mental pathways, right? Where your mind kind of wants to do what it knows and what it's comfortable. And it can be tough to kind of force yourself out of that rut. So like even this deal, even if it doesn't come to pass, it doesn't happen, the mental exercise of us going through this and saying, how could we make this work, right? How would we structure something like this? In a way, you're kind of, your brain's firing, right? It's firing neurotransmitters and hitting different synapses, and there's a lot going on in there bouncing around where you're kind of opening your mind up to new stuff. So just that mental exercise opens you up to going like, yeah, how can I? How could this work? Not this won't work because. So I think, yeah, even if we don't make this work, I think just going through this, then the next go around, you'll know how to approach that. Well, hey, Brian, as we kind of wrap things up, as we kind of close things out, I'd say like for people listening, if someone that kind of resonates, they go, hey, I feel the same way where I'd explain myself as like somebody very ordinary who's able to do some pretty extraordinary things, and at least relative to my lifestyle, right? If somebody's listening, they kind of feel similar to you, kind of like that. You go, hey, I've got average resources, average intelligence, average connections, right? I didn't have somebody with millions of dollars that are sitting around, but they want to build something meaningful like you truly have. What's the piece of advice that you would kind of leave them with?
I would just go back to finding your superpower, finding what you're good at, understanding who you are, how how you're wired. And, we are 30 or 40 years ago, the amount of information that our minds had access to was incredibly limited, and the pitches that we were given, just the commercials and the sales pitches and whatever, all of that was really limited. But now we are bombarded with all kinds of new tactics, new tools, new software. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And so, for me personally, going back to the superpower idea, it's just been simple focus, just trying to find a niche in the market and getting good at that, understanding it. And, the reason why so many businesses, at least in my opinion, businesses fail, sports teams lose, churches aren't effective, land investments or financial investments, fail, it's because of the shiny object syndrome that, there's always, I mean, it seems like every week or at least every couple of weeks, there's some new land tool or secret or method or whatever. And I think the temptation is, oh, well, that's new and that's what's working now. So maybe I need to pivot and transition. And then you find yourself like in a constant state of pivoting and transition where you never get your feet anchored underneath you, where you can have some stability and consistency in your business, and you lose focus and then you close your doors and you're like, well, that didn't work. And so,
Yeah. No, I
it,
think there's power in it. It's funny because some of the real like pillars, right, are not the sexy, exciting things like
right.
simplicity, focus, consistency, right? Like those are all things that none of them are like, going to get somebody super excited. But at the same time, that's what there's some of those pillars that lead to, like you said, like stability, right? I would add to it, man, when I think of you, I think of all those things. I do think of consistent, simple, but I also would say like authenticity, right? Integrity. There's a lot of things that I see, not just like shared values, but some shared philosophies and the approach where I would say there's a lot of things that I could see from ministry, that I can kind of see have helped you as you're like talking with probably property owners, right? And you're not so much high pressure converting them. It's just kind of building trust, communicating some of that leadership, that integrity that shows through where people sell Brian their land, right? Not so much because it's the price, but I just say, yeah, hey, I appreciate how you build like you've been able to prosper, but at the same time you've stayed authentic and you built a business that you love with your family that's very authentic and successful, stable and growing.
And
All right, Brian.
again, it's the sheer grace of God. It's in spite of me, not because of me, and the books that I've read, the people I've had along the way. Just one real quick story. So there's a guy that when we met on our RV trip that I was talking about a little earlier ago, we were traveling and we had stayed in Savannah, Georgia, and we went downtown Savannah, Georgia. And there's like a river there. I don't even remember. And maybe the Savannah River. I don't remember. But there's like a boardwalk place. And we were just kind of walking down this place. And there was a candy shop there. And so we were walking by. We thought, hey, it'd be really nice to go into this candy shop and maybe buy the kids some candy or something. The kids were, obviously really small at that time. Well, we found out that it was closed. They were doing some renovations on the inside. But there was a man outside on the sidewalk. And he was just kind of there, looked like he was maybe sweeping some things and maybe moving some things around. Older gentleman. And he just came to us. He said, hey guys, I'm so sorry. Our store's closed, but we'll be open a little bit later. And ended up talking to this guy. His name was Stan. All right. So we realized after talking to him that this was a guy we had never heard of him before, but a profound businessman. His name is Stan the Candy Man. And he had invented years ago or created this business called Savannah's Candy Kitchen. And, you know, probably every person on, at least in the United States, has probably eaten at least one piece of candy that has come through, his business. It's a multi-million-dollar candy business. And he built this thing from scratch. And so my two boys, I remember they were kind of standing right beside me. They're really young at the time. And so I wanted them to kind of hear some of this conversation. So I asked Stan, I said, what's been your secret, for staying in business so long and being so successful? And the thing he told me, I'll never forget, he said, it's just consistency. I've just stayed consistent. And, we live in a world where, we want to go to the gym one time and come out with a six pack, but it's
Yeah.
just not going to work that way. We just got to keep doing the same thing over and over again, even when it's tough, even when it's hard, even when it's discouraging. You just got to keep plugging along and being faithful to
And
the
I think
process.
people have that tendency to, they ask a question like that and then they get that answer and then they go, well, what's the second most important thing? Right? Because the consistency is not exciting. It sounds like, wait a minute, that's not a secret, but that the secret's kind of on the surface, right? It really is. Stan the candy man. I'm gonna have to
Right.
Google him when we get off here.
Yeah, yeah, and interesting. I feel like it was just providence that we came into conversation with him at that day. I mean, shortly thereafter, he passed away unexpectedly, and I feel like God had just allowed us to have that conversation with him to learn from him in that moment in time. And again, I'll never forget that as long as I live. It was a lesson that he was able to give me, and in a short conversation that was so meaningful.
Well, and you were thoughtful enough to ask it, right? Like most people wouldn't even think of that. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, that's a great way to wrap it up.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, I appreciate all your time today. And obviously, I guess we'll be talking later today too, right? Via coaching. I think we've got a call scheduled today as well. So I'll see you in a couple hours.
Hey, Travis, thank you. Appreciate what you do and how you've helped me.
Absolutely. All right, Brian. Thank you for coming on.